She called his '69 Camaro scrap metal. 21 days later, a museum paid 4M for it. 31 appraisers had walked through the Colton estate auction in the past decade, and not one of them had looked twice at the car in the back corner of the lower garage. It sat behind a rusted shelving unit under a tarpaulin that had not been lifted in 11 years. The tarpaulin was gray. The garage was dim. Nobody looked. Then a man named Levi Cade walked in, past the appraisers in their pressed shirts and their lanyards, past the numbered lots and the catalog tables, and he stopped in the back corner. He stood there for a long time without touching anything. Beside him, a 7-year-old girl holding a small stuffed dog named Wren. One glass eye slightly looser than the other, a repair her father had done twice with a drop of jeweler's adhesive and a steady hand. The lead appraiser, a woman named Diana Voss of Voss Heritage Auctions, said it loud enough for the room to hear. She said the car was scrap metal with a sentimental price tag. She said it with the particular confidence of someone who had been right so many times. That being wrong had stopped feeling possible. 21 days later, a private automotive museum in Stuttgart wired $4,200,000 for the car. Nobody laughed at Levi Cade after that. Stay with this one. It earns every minute. The Colton estate sat on 42 acres of mid-state farmland that had been in the family for 3 generations and had been profitable for none of them. Raymond Colton, who had been the last of the line to actually work the land, had died 18 months ago at 81. His only surviving heir was his granddaughter, Margot Colton Price, who had driven out from the city for the funeral and had not been back since until Voss Heritage Auctions scheduled the estate liquidation. Margot was 33. She was the director of client strategy at a financial services firm downtown. She was precise and quick, and she had learned, early and well, that the most reliable way to handle things you didn't understand was to surround yourself with people who did, and then ask the right questions. She thought she had done this with the estate. She had hired Voss Heritage because Diana Voss had a 14-year track record and a client list that included 3 museum foundations and a minor royal family. Diana Voss was 46. She wore her authority the way some people wear expensive coats, not to keep warm, but to be seen keeping warm. She had built her firm on a rigorous, unromantic approach to valuation. She did not fall in love with objects. She did not allow sentiment in the appraisal room. She was very good at what she did. She was also, in the specific case of the car in the lower garage, wrong in a way that would define the remainder of her professional reputation. The estate auction was scheduled for a Saturday 3 weeks out. Voss and her team had cataloged 216 lots: furniture, farm equipment, tools, a collection of hunting prints, a set of silverware that turned out to be silver plate, 3 lots of ceramics. The lower garage had been assessed as miscellaneous automotive and equipment, valued collectively at $8,000 for the purposes of the catalog. The car was lot 214, described as 1969 Chevrolet Camaro, non-running, condition poor, no title documentation on file, estimate $800 when he hundred. Levi Cade was 31 years old, and he lived in a rental house 20 minutes from the estate, in a town with 1 hardware store and a diner that had been operating under the same name since 1974. He drove a pickup that he maintained himself. He had been maintaining vehicles himself since he was 11, when his grandfather, not Raymond Colton's grandfather, his own, puts a set of tools in his hands in a garage behind a house in rural Tennessee and told him that a man who could fix things was never fully at the mercy of anyone. His grandfather had been right about that, and about very few other things, but that one had lasted. Levi had a degree in automotive restoration from a technical college in Georgia and a second credential, rarely mentioned, occasionally surprising, in materials science from a state university program he had completed part-time over 4 years while working full-time as a restoration specialist at a private facility in the Southeast that handled, among other things, vehicles consigned by 2 Smithsonian-affiliated collections. He had left that position 14 months ago. He was now working independently, taking jobs as they came, which they did with enough regularity to keep the rental house and to keep Ren in new glass eyes when the old ones gave out. His daughter's name was Iris. She was 7. She had her father's patience and her mother's particular way of watching people. Not staring, exactly, but attending, taking inventory. Iris's mother, Clara, had died 19 months ago of a cardiac event that had given no warning and no chance for preparation. She had been 29. She had been a kindergarten teacher. She had kept a jar of pebbles on the windowsill, one for every place she wanted to take Iris before she turned 18. There were 43 pebbles in the jar. Levi had not counted them since the first week after she died, when he had counted them without meaning to, sitting at the kitchen table at 4 in the morning, not sleeping and not quite awake. The jar was still on the windowsill. The mornings were a particular kind of hard. Not the acute grief of the first month, which had been something else entirely, a quality of unreality that Levi did not have precise language for and did not try to name. This was more ordinary than that. This was waking up at 5:15 in a house built for 3, and making coffee for 1, and getting a 7-year, old, dressed and fed and out the door in a way that felt like continuity. Because continuity was the thing Iris needed most, and the thing that cost the most to provide. Levi had learned that the way you provided it was not by pretending nothing had changed. It was by building a new structure around the changed thing and holding that structure through repetition until it became normal. This was also, he had realized, somewhere in the 10th month. Essentially, the same process as a mechanical restoration. You did not pretend the damage hadn't occurred. You worked around the damage, with the damage, until the working around became the thing itself. He had not told anyone that. It seemed like the kind of observation that would sound either too large or too small, depending on the person. Iris carried Ren everywhere. The stuffed dog had come into her possession at age 3, given by Clara's mother, and it had been repaired 6 times in the years since. The loose glass eye was the most recent repair. Levi had done it at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, while Iris watched, asking questions with the focused attention she brought to all of his repair work. She wanted to understand the mechanism. She always wanted to understand the mechanism. That was Clara's daughter. Levi had heard about the Colton estate auction from a man named Benjamin Marsh, who ran the only serious automotive salvage operation within 40 miles, and who made it his business to know what was coming up for sale within a 2-county radius. Benjamin was 63 and had the specific kind of weathered authority that comes from having been right about mechanical things for 4 consecutive decades. He had known Levi since Levi moved to the area 14 months ago. He had decided within the first 3 conversations that Levi knew what he was talking about, which was Benjamin's primary criterion for human value. Benjamin called on a Tuesday morning. He said he had heard through a friend who did odd jobs at the Colton place that the lower garage had a car under a tarp that nobody at the auction house had properly looked at. He said the friend described it as a '69 Camaro. He said the friend had seen enough of the bodywork to note that the VIN tag was still on the dashboard. Levi was quiet for a moment. Benjamin said he thought Levi might want to go take a look before the public preview days. Levi said he would make some calls. He made 3 calls in the next 40 minutes. The first was to a contact at an automotive registry who could run a partial VIN for preliminary identification. The second was to a former colleague at the Smithsonian facility who specialized in pre-1970 American muscle documentation. The third was to Colton Estate. to ask whether independent appraisers could access the property during the pre-auction setup period. The estate coordinator, not Margot, who handled the auction through Voss and did not take direct calls, said that was generally the auction house's call. He said Levi could try calling Diana Voss directly. Levi called Diana Voss. She told him the preview was Thursday and Friday, like any other interested buyer. She said the garage lots were assessed and catalogued. She said if he had concerns about the assessment, he could submit a written inquiry to Voss Heritage's lot review process, which had a standard 5-business-day turnaround. The auction was in 3 weeks. Levi thanked her and hung up. He called Benjamin back and asked if his friend at the Colton place could get him into the lower garage before Thursday. Benjamin said he'd find out. It was a Wednesday afternoon, overcast, the kind of flat gray light that makes distances hard to read. Levi pulled up the drive in his truck with Iris in the passenger seat and Wren on the dash. The friend of Benjamin's, an older man named Henry, who maintained the grounds and who had no particular attachment to the auction house's authority over the property, let them in through the side entrance of the lower garage without ceremony. He turned on the work lights and left them to it. The lower garage held the rusted shelving, 2 pieces of farm equipment that had clearly been intended for outdoor storage, and, in the far corner, under the gray tarpaulin, the shape of something large and low and specific. Levi stood in front of it for a moment, not moving, just looking at the shape under the cover, the particular outline of the roofline, the specific proportion of the hood length to the body. Not moving, not speaking, not reaching. Iris stood beside him, Wren tucked under her arm. She was reading the room the way she read all rooms, quietly, with full attention, waiting for information. Levi pulled the tarpaulin from the front, folding it back over the roof. He did not rush. The car was a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1. He knew it before he checked the VIN. He knew it. The way you know a word you've been reading about for years, the first time someone says it aloud to you. Not new information, but confirmed information. The ZL1 was not a car most people had heard of. It had been produced in 1969 as a special order, Copo Option 9560, built specifically to get an all-aluminum 427 big block engine past the GM corporate ban on engines over 400 cubic inches in intermediate-sized cars. It had been ordered that way on paper as a racing option, and 69 of them had been built. 69. Not a typo. Not 6,900. 69 cars. Fewer than 50 were known to still exist. He checked the VIN. He checked the partial stamping on the block. What was visible of it through 11 years of dust, and the particular darkness of a low-hanging hood. He checked the cowl tag, which was intact. He got down on his back and looked at the frame rails. He was down there for 11 minutes. He got up. He wiped his hands on a shop cloth he'd brought from the truck. He looked at the car for a long time. Iris said, "Is it like the other one?" He said no. He said it was different from every other one. He said there were only a few like it left in the world. She considered Wren's loose ear for a moment. Then she said, "Does the lady at the auction know?" Levi said he didn't think so. Iris nodded slowly, in the way she nodded when she was filing information she wasn't finished with yet. Levi went to see Margot Colton Price the next morning. He had to go through the estate coordinator to get there. And the estate coordinator had to call Margot's assistant. And the assistant had to call Margot. And the call from Margot came back to the estate coordinator at 8:47 in the morning. And the answer was no. Margot was not available for drop-in consultations about individual auction lots. She had hired professionals for this. She referred all such inquiries to Voss Heritage. Levi drove to the auction house instead. Voss Heritage occupied a renovated space in a commercial district. Good lighting, framed catalogs on the walls, the particular smell of a place that charges for atmosphere as well as service. Diana Voss was in a meeting. Levi waited 22 minutes in a chair near the reception desk with Iris beside him. Wren in her lap, both of them reading. Iris a picture book about deep-sea creatures. Levi a printed document he'd prepared that morning, 8 pages, dense with footnotes. When Diana Voss came out, she looked at Levi the way people look at someone they haven't invited. She agreed to 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, Levi explained what he believed the car in the lower garage was. He used the registration documentation his contact had pulled. He used the cowl tag data. He used 3 reference citations from the authoritative registry on Camaros, printed from his document. He said it plainly and without theater, the way he explained things to Iris. Not simplifying, but not performing either. Diana Voss listened. She let him finish. Then she said she had 22 years of experience appraising American muscle cars, and she said her senior specialist had personally reviewed the lower garage. And she said that the vehicle in question had no title, no service history, and no documentation establishing provenance. And that absent documentation a car was worth what it drove like, which was nothing, because it did not drive. She said it had been catalogued accurately. She said if he wanted to bid on it Thursday's he was welcome to register like any other buyer. She said it in the tone that people use when they believe the conversation is over. Levi said he understood. He picked up his 8-page document. He thanked her for her time. At the door, Iris looked back at Diana Voss, not with hostility, with the inventory look. Taking note. Levi called his former colleague at the Smithsonian facility that evening. Her name was Elaine Farrow. She was 58, had spent 31 years in automotive provenance research, and had written the standard reference text on COPO documentation that was used by every major auction house in the country, including Voss Heritage. He walked her through the cowl tag data, the VIN fragment, the block stamping. He described the bodywork, the interior, original bucket seats, original console, the specific texture and color of the headliner that matched 1969 production documentation. He described the engine, as much as he could assess without starting it. Elaine was quiet for a long time after he finished. She said, "You're sure about the L88 aluminum block?" He said he was sure about what he could see. He said the block was consistent with Zeal 1's spec. He said he would need to pull the intake to confirm the casting numbers, but that accessing the car for that kind of inspection was complicated by the auction house's hold. Elaine said she wanted to see the photographs he'd taken. He sent them. She called back 40 minutes later. She said, "Levy, that's a ZL1." She said it the way people say things they have spent careers preparing to say. The situation, as Levi laid it out on his kitchen table that night, with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee, was this. He could not access the car to complete a full verification before the auction. The auction house had locked the lots. Diana Voss had dismissed his inquiry. Margot Colton Price was unreachable through normal channels. The preview days were Thursday and Friday, but preview days were public access with supervision. No tools, no inspection beyond visual. Not sufficient to confirm the block casting numbers. The auction was Saturday. He had 3 options. First, he could bid on the car Saturday and win it. At the catalog estimate of $800 to $1,200, he could afford it. But if word got out before Saturday, if anyone in the room had done the same homework he had, the price could move. Second, he could try again to reach Margot directly. If he could show her what he knew, she could pull the lot, have it independently assessed, and protect herself from selling a $4 million car for $1,200. Third, he could do nothing. Show up Saturday, bid what he could, and accept the outcome. He did not write down a 4th option, because the 4th option, staying quiet and winning the car at auction, while Margot lost millions she didn't know she had, was not an option. Not in any room he wanted to live in. Not in any version of himself he wanted Iris to grow up looking at. He sat with this for a while. He had a particular way of thinking through hard problems that Clara had once described as talking to the problem instead of about it. She had meant it as a mild tease. He had taken it as an accurate description. You had to get close enough to the problem to hear it. You had to be willing to hear what it said, even when the answer was complicated. The answer here was not complicated. It was just inconvenient. He thought about Margot Colton Price, who had inherited a 42-acre farm and an estate she had never been taught to understand, and who had hired professionals because she did not know how to tell the difference between the right professionals and the wrong ones, which was not ignorance, but simply the position of someone who had not needed to know before now. He did not think poorly of her for it. He thought about Raymond Colton, who had bought a racing car at some point in his youth, and had driven it, and then parked it, and then stored it. Correctly, without announcement, without leaving a note that explained what it was, whether that was humility or privacy, or simply the assumption that someone would figure it out. Levi could not know, but he thought there was something in that. Something worth respecting. He wrote Margot's office number at the top of the legal pad. He would try again in the morning. He tried 4 times on Thursday. The assistant was polite and consistent. Margot was in client meetings. Margot was on a call. Margot had been briefed that inquiries about the Colton estate should go to Voss Heritage. The assistant's voice had the particular quality of a person who is repeating instructions they did not write. On Thursday afternoon, Levi drove to the preview. He walked through with Iris, Wren under her arm, and he looked at Lot 214 in the lower garage. Under the supervision of a Voss Heritage staff member who stood 4 feet away and who watched them with the attention of someone who had been told to watch. He photographed what he could. He confirmed the cowl tag data. He could not touch the engine. He drove home. He made dinner. He read to Iris from the deep-sea creature book, which had reached the section on bioluminescence. Iris had questions. They were good questions. He answered them as well as he could, and told her honestly when he didn't know. She accepted this without complaint, which was something he had noticed about her since she was 4. She was not bothered by the edges of knowledge. She was interested in what was known and comfortable with the line where it stopped. He put her to bed. Wren went on the pillow beside her in the position that meant Iris intended to hold it sometime in the night and wanted it already there. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The room was its particular version of quiet. Not silence. The small sounds of a child sleeping. He thought about what was sitting under that gray tarpaulin in the lower garage of a farmhouse 20 minutes away. He thought about the 69 cars. 69. Built for a single racing season and then scattered across 4 decades and several continents. The surviving examples tracked by collectors, with the particular intensity that rare things attract. He had known about the Ziesel 1 since he was 19, had read the registry entries, had seen one once at a private collection in Georgia, behind glass, not accessible. A number on a plaque. Not a car, exactly. A document. The one in the lower garage was not behind glass. It had been parked by a man who had understood it, and kept that understanding, private for 30 years. That mattered. That was the part nobody in the auction house had thought to ask about. He went back to the kitchen. He found Margot Colton Price's personal cell number through a sequence of professional connections that took him an hour and a half and 3 favors he had not intended to spend this week. He texted her at 9:52 in the evening. He kept it short. He said he needed 4 minutes of her time before Saturday. He said he had documentation that her estate was about to sell an asset at a fraction of its actual value. He said he was not a competitor, not a dealer, and not trying to buy the car below value, and that if she looked up his name and the Smithsonian facility, she would find independent confirmation of his credentials. He said he would come to her, wherever was convenient, at whatever time worked. He set the phone on the table. He did not expect a response that night. The response came at 11:17 p. It said, "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. my office. Bring everything." He brought everything, the 8 pages. Elaine Farrow's preliminary written assessment, which Elaine had sent that afternoon as a PDF, and which Levi had printed in full. The Copo registry documentation. The cowl tag photographs annotated in red ink. A printed copy of Elaine's reference text. The standard volume, the one used by every major auction house in the country. Open to the chapter on ZL1 identification criteria, with 4 passages underlined. He brought Iris because it was Friday, and the school day didn't start until 8:30. She sat in the chair beside him with Ren on her knees, and she was quiet in the way she was quiet when she understood something important was happening. Margot arrived at 6:58. She was in clothes that indicated she had been awake since early. Not disheveled, but not assembled for a client-facing day either. She looked at Levi. She looked at Iris. She sat down and said, "Show me." Levi showed her. He went through it methodically, the way he went through complex repairs. In sequence, from the structural to the specific, not skipping steps, not assuming the other person knew things they hadn't said they knew. He told her what a ZL1 was. He told her why it mattered. He told her what the market had paid for comparable examples in the past 18 months. With auction records, with dates, with hammer prices. He told her what Elaine Farrow had said, and who Elaine Farrow was, and why that mattered. Margot listened. She did not interrupt. She turned the pages carefully, the way people turn things they intend to remember. When he finished, she sat for a moment in the quiet. She asked how Diana Voss had responded when he raised this. Levi said he'd tell her exactly what had said. He did. He was precise. He did not editorialize. He stated what he had presented and what Voss had said in response. Margot looked at the printed auction records. She looked at the cowl tag photograph. She picked up her phone and called Diana Voss. The call lasted 9 minutes. Levi could hear enough from Voss's side. Not the words, but the tone. The register of controlled authority, encountering something it had not planned. To understand how the call was going. Margot did not raise her voice once. Not once. She was specific, and she was sequential. And she did not allow the conversation to move sideways. She said she needed the car pulled from Saturday's auction, pending independent assessment. She said she would need Voss to coordinate access for an independent specialist. And she named Elaine Farrow within 24 hours. When she hung up, she looked at the table for a moment. She says, "She told you the car had no provenance." Levi said yes. Margot said, "The cowl tag is provenance." Levi said, "Yes, not accusatory, not triumphant. Just the affirmation of a fact that had been true before either of them entered the room." Elaine Farrow arrived the following morning, a Saturday that was no longer auction day for lot 214. She was a small woman who moved through the lower garage with the efficient authority of someone who had done this particular thing many times and knew exactly what she was looking for. She pulled the intake manifold. She confirmed the block casting number. She checked the frame stamping. She examined the cowl tag under a loop for 40 seconds. She stood up. She said, "This is a genuine ZL1. Numbers matching, original drivetrain, original interior." She said it in the same flat, certain voice she would use to report that the sky was a specific color. This is one of 43 confirmed surviving examples. Possibly fewer, depending on one contested example currently in litigation in California. Margot asked what it was worth. Elaine said she would not give a number without a formal written assessment. She said, informally, based on the last 3 comparable sales, the range was between $3.8 million and $4.5 million, depending on condition of the engine internals and the completeness of the drivetrain. The lower garage was quiet, not the quiet of nothing happening. Diana Voss arrived 40 minutes after Elaine's assessment was complete. She had been called by Margot's assistant. She walked into the lower garage with two of her staff members. In the manner of someone who has decided that the best way through a difficult situation is to arrive first and control the framing. Margot was there. Elaine was there. Levi was near the back wall with Iris, who had Ren against her shoulder and was watching Diana Voss with the inventory look. Voss looked at the car. She looked at Elaine Farrow. Something moved behind her eyes that she did not allow into her expression. She said this was a highly unusual situation. She said a ZL1 in this condition, and with this documentation profile, was genuinely uncommon. She said her specialist had made an assessment under challenging conditions, limited access, time pressure, and that certain details had not been fully developed. Margot said, "You listed it at $1,200. Voss said that was the catalog estimate pending further review, and that the review process existed precisely for situations like this. Margot said Levi had tried to initiate that review process. She said she wanted to understand why he had been turned away. Voss said, the firm received a high volume of inquiries from buyers seeking to influence lot valuations, and that without documentation, such inquiries could not be. Margot said, he had documentation. He gave it to you in a meeting. The room was quiet. Elaine Farrow had turned to look out the open garage door, not disengaging, but giving the conversation room to breathe. Iris, from the back wall, asked Levi in a quiet voice whether they were going to go soon. He said in a few minutes. She leaned against the wall with Ren and waited. Voss said she understood. This was a difficult conversation. She said the firm had always prioritized the interests of its estate clients. She said she would of course work with Margot going forward to ensure the car was handled appropriately. Margot said she would be retaining a different firm going forward. She said it without heat. Just a sentence. Voss left. Her two staff members followed. Levi spent the next 16 days on the car. Not restoring it. Not rebuilding it. Documenting it. That was the work at this level. The painstaking, detail-by-detail construction of a provenance record that could withstand the scrutiny of a major auction or a major private sale. It was the kind of work that required patience and precision and a specific kind of knowledge that was rarer than most people assumed. He photographed every component. He cataloged every casting number. He cross-referenced the cowl tag data against production records that existed in 3 archives, one of which was held at a university library in Michigan and required a formal research request to access. He worked mornings and evenings, around the school schedule. Iris came to the lower garage on the days when Henry was around to keep an eye. She read her books on the wooden stool, near the wall, Ren in her lap, occasionally asking questions that Levi answered without stopping what he was doing, because the questions were good and the work was not so delicate that it required silence. On the 12th day, he pulled and inspected the engine internals. The block was in extraordinary condition. 11 years dormant, but the car had been properly decommissioned by someone. Drained, fogged, stored with care. Whoever had parked it had known what they were parking. He asked Henry, on a break, whether he knew anything about how Raymond Colton had acquired the car. Henry thought about it. He said Raymond had driven it when Henry first came to work at the estate, 32 years ago. He said Raymond had called it his racing car, though Henry had never seen him actually race it. He said Raymond had known more about engines than most people gave him credit for. Levi thought about this for a while. He thought about a man in his 50s, alone on 42 acres, who had kept a car like this in a garage and not talked about it, who had commissioned it to be properly stored when he stopped driving it, who had understood what it was and chosen not to make a performance of that understanding. He found that he respected Raymond Colton more than most of the credentialed people he had met in the past 3 weeks. On the 17th day, Margot asked to meet at the lower garage. She came alone. No assistant, no auction house representative. She walked slowly around the car, which was now uncovered, cleaned, its paint showing true beneath 11 years of surface oxidation. The aluminum block visible through the open hood where Levi had been working. She stood at the front of the car for a long time. She said, "He never told me what this was." Levi said sometimes people kept things because the keeping was enough. She looked at the car for another moment. Then she said she had received 3 formal expressions of interest, since word had circulated through Elaine's network. One from a private collector in Texas, one from a foundation in Japan, one from an automotive museum in Stuttgart, Germany, the Porsche Museum's counterpart for American muscle, which had been actively building its post-war American collection for 6 years. She asked Levi what he thought. He said that was her call, not his. She said she was asking for his opinion. He said the Stuttgart Museum was the right answer. He said a car like this, in a collection like that, would be seen by people who understood what they were looking at. He said the Texas collector would keep it in a private garage. He said the foundation would likely resell within a decade. He said the museum would keep it, display it, and document it as part of a historical record that would outlast everyone in the room. Margot said that was what she had been thinking. She said, "My grandfather would have said the same thing." She looked at the car one more time. She touched the hood. Just once, with 2 fingers, lightly, the way you touch something you are saying goodbye to. She said she wanted Levi to handle the final documentation submission for the Stuttgart sale. She said she would compensate him appropriately. She named a figure. He said that was more than fair. She said it wasn't, actually. She said that without him, this car would have sold for $1,200 to a dealer who would have flipped it for $40,000 to a buyer who didn't know what they had, and that somewhere in that sequence the documentation would have been lost, and the car's story would have ended there. She said, "What you did, you didn't have to do that." He said he had a daughter who watched what he did. Margot looked at him. She said she understood that. On the 21st day, the Stuttgart Automotive Heritage Museum wired $4,200,000 to the Colton estate account. Levi was in the lower garage doing the final walkthrough, the last of the documentation photographs, when Margot's assistant called to tell him the transfer had cleared. He set down his camera. He stood in the empty bay where the car had been. It had been collected 2 days earlier, transported in a climate-controlled trailer, accompanied by a 12-page provenance document that bore Elaine Farrow's signature and Levi's cataloging credit. The bay was just an empty space now, a rectangle of concrete with a faint outline where the tires had rested. He stayed in the empty garage for a few minutes, not doing anything in particular, just standing in the space where the thing had been. Benjamin Marsh called while he was driving to the school pickup. He said, "4 million." Levi said, 4.2. Benjamin was quiet for a moment. Then he said the same thing he said at the end of most conversations about remarkable things. He said, "Well, just that. Well." Levi said he'd talk to him later. He pulled into the school lot at 3:27. Iris came out at 3:29, backpack on, Wren retrieved and in her arms before she reached the truck. She climbed in. She put Wren on the dashboard, the good day position, and she told him about a project they were starting in class, about things that had been around for a long time, things that lasted. He pulled out of the school lot. The afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does at the end of things. Settling, going amber, making the ordinary road look like it had been designed for something particular. Iris was explaining the project. She said you were supposed to pick something that had lasted and find out why. She said she was thinking about picking a car. She said she knew a little bit about one. She was holding Wren by the ear and looking out the window, and the words were still coming, easy and continuous the way they came when she was interested in something, which was most of the time. He was listening. He drove.